The first image of Earth appeared without ceremony. No alarms, no gasps, just a quiet projection blooming into existence at the center of the Hall of Stars, an unremarkable blue sphere, suspended in light, rotating slowly as if it had nothing to hide. I remember thinking how small it looked, how ordinary, a planet like thousands we had already catalogued, stripped of mystery before its first full rotation completed. The council barely leaned forward. "What?" asked one of the archivists. "Sol 3, came the reply. "Carbon-based life, dominant species, bipedal primates, pre-interstellar. Low threat." The word echoed across the chamber, stamped invisibly onto the world before us. I should have agreed. By every Dominion metric, the species calling itself human was insignificant. Their technology was primitive, their energy mastery crude, their planet scarred by inefficiency and excess. They orbited a mediocre star in a quiet arm of the galaxy no one contested. And yet, I felt a tightening beneath my secondary lungs. As the data streams unfolded, history replaced geography. Wars flickered across the projection, centuries of them, human against human, cities reduced to ash, oceans poisoned, skies darkened by their own industry. I watched plague sweep continents, watched weapons capable of planetary extinction brought to the brink of activation by trembling hands. Again and again, extinction stood before them. Again and again, they stepped back from the edge. Not because they were wise, not because they were united. Often they survived by chance, by stubbornness, by a refusal to stop fighting even when reason demanded surrender. Any other species would have collapsed under such sustained self-destruction. Dominion philosophers taught that harmony was the foundation of survival. Humans had none, and yet they endured. "Remarkable resilience for such a young species," I murmured, my words lost beneath the hum of analysis. One of the counselors flicked a claw dismissively. "Survivorship bias. They live because they have not yet destroyed themselves." The projection zoomed further. Individual stories surfaced. Soldiers shielding strangers from explosions, scientists working to death in aerated ruins, civilians rebuilding cities they knew would fall again. There was no elegance to it, no grand design, just persistence, relentless, inelegant persistence. I felt something I had no word for. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. I requested deeper archival access. The council granted it without interest. To them, Earth was already solved, a potential labor reservoir, nothing more, a future footnote in Dominion expansion. But as the hall dimmed and the image of Earth faded, I remained still, staring at the after-image burned into my vision. I had studied 1,000 species. I had signed off on dozens of classifications. Never before had my instincts rebelled so violently against consensus.
There was a pattern in humanity's chaos, an adaptation born not of design, but of suffering repeated until it became strength. I recorded my concerns in a private log, flagged beneath layers of protocol. Species demonstrates anomalous endurance under sustained existential stress. Recommend caution. The system acknowledged my entry. No one else did. As the council moved on to brighter stars and richer worlds, Earth was reduced to a line of text and a probability curve. Low threat, low priority, easily controlled. I lingered behind, alone in the vast chamber, listening to the echo of my own unease. Because somewhere beneath their wars and failures, beneath the scars they carved into their own world, humans had learned something the Dominion had forgotten: how to survive when everything is broken. And as the lights of the Hall of Stars dimmed completely, a thought, unwelcome and persistent, settled into my mind. If a species can endure its own destruction, what might it become when faced with ours? The first probe vanished 3 breaths after entering Earth's upper atmosphere. At the time, no one was concerned. Atmospheric turbulence, a calibration error, a minor magnetic anomaly. Earth possessed many such inconveniences. The Dominion had mapped far deadlier worlds without loss. I recorded the failure, adjusted parameters, and authorized the launch of a second probe. It never transmitted at all. Only then did the council take notice, though not with alarm. Irritation, perhaps. A low murmur of disbelief rippled through the observation deck as telemetry flatlined into silence. "Impossible," one of the engineers said. That was correct, according to our monitors. A third probe was dispatched, hardened against interference, its systems redundantly shielded. This one survived long enough to send fragmented imagery before it too fell dark. The final frames were chaotic, clouds tearing past, bursts of electromagnetic distortion, crude projectiles streaking upward far beyond their expected capabilities. I leaned closer to the display, my frills tightening. Humans were aiming at us. Emergency surveillance protocols were enacted, stealth arrays unfolded, long-range observation replaced passive scanning. We watched their world not as catalogers now, but as cautious predators watching unfamiliar prey. What we saw disturbed me more than the probe losses. Across their continents, human militaries were already changing tactics. Wreckage from our fallen probes had been recovered, dismantled, studied, stripped apart with a speed that bordered on the absurd. Within cycles, their communications altered frequencies to avoid our scans. Their radar systems adapted. Their weapons platforms reconfigured, crude but increasingly effective. They were learning. I had seen adaptation before. Many species adjusted when confronted with superior technology. But it usually took generations, cultural shifts, evolutionary time. Humans did it in weeks.
The cities beneath our gaze told a deeper story. Scarred megastructures rebuilt atop older ruins. Defensive networks layered over civilian architecture. Monuments not to victory, but to loss. Every human settlement bore the marks of previous annihilations, wars that should have erased them entirely. Instead, those wars had shaped them. Pain, I realized, was not an exception in human history. It was a constant. They did not organize their societies to avoid suffering, as the Dominion had. They organized to endure it, to absorb it, to continue despite it. I accessed deeper cultural archives, human art, human literature. Their myths were not tales of perfect worlds or eternal peace. They were stories of struggle, heroes broken and reforged, civilizations falling and rising again. Even their entertainment glorified survival against impossible odds. Among the Dominion species, survival was a gentle thing, a balance maintained through harmony, cooperation, and careful moderation. Conflict was seen as failure. Among humans, conflict was expected, necessary. I brought these observations before the council. I spoke of their accelerating adaptation curves, of their psychological conditioning toward hardship, of a species trained by its own history to resist annihilation. "They are frightened animals lashing out," one counselor replied calmly. Another agreed. "Once confronted with overwhelming force, they will submit." I did not argue further. Dominion hierarchy does not reward dissent. Still, I continued to watch Earth obsessively, unable to look away. And then came the moment that confirmed my fear. A human aerospace vehicle, barely spaceworthy by our standards, intercepted one of our high-altitude observation drones. It should not have been possible. The drone was faster, higher, cloaked, yet the humans predicted its path. They sacrificed the vehicle without hesitation, drove it directly into the drone's trajectory, detonating its engines at the moment of impact. Both machines vanished in a bloom of fire and debris. The human pilot did not eject. I searched their communications afterward. There was no panic, no outrage, only a brief acknowledgement of loss and immediate reassignment of resources. They had traded one life for information, and they considered it acceptable. A chill ran through my neural lattice. Dominion warriors were trained for battle, but even they were not conditioned to die without a hope of victory. Humans did not require victory, only resistance, delay, one more breath. The council still spoke of conquest timetables and labor quotas. They spoke of Earth as if it were already owned. I said nothing, because in the flickering lights of their cities, in the hurried movements of a species preparing for something it could not yet see, I understood the truth they refused to face. Humans did not survive because they avoided breaking. They survived because they had already broken, again and again, and learned how to stand up each time. And as Dominion fleets began to realign toward soul space, a single terrifying thought took shape within me. If this is how they fight when they are weak, what will they become when they are desperate? The invasion began at dawn by human reckoning. From orbit, it was beautiful. Dominion descent carriers broke atmosphere in flawless formation, their hulls burning with controlled fire, shields shimmering like falling stars. Every vector had been calculated, every resistance node mapped and prioritized. This was not a war, the Council insisted. It was an enforcement action, a demonstration. I watched from the command sanctum, my claws pressed into the crystalline railing as the first landing zones bloomed across the planet's surface. Then, the humans responded. There was no unified counterattack, no elegant defense grid. Instead, chaos. Aircraft launched without coordination, ground units mobilized in disordered waves, civilian vehicles fled alongside military convoys. Their communications overlapped in a storm of voices, fear, and defiance. And yet, they came. Human craft, laughably fragile by Dominion standards, raced toward our landing zones. Missiles detonated harmlessly against our shields. Kinetic rounds sparked and fell away. Logic dictated immediate retreat. Instead, the humans advanced faster. They charged through firestorms that should have broken morale in moments. I saw infantry units advancing on foot against descending warforms, knowing their weapons could barely scar our armor. I saw pilots steer burning aircraft directly into our shield emitters, trading their lives for seconds of disruption. Seconds that mattered. On the ground, Dominion warriors deployed with precision, suppression fields activated, non-lethal pacification protocols engaged. Initially, the Council had ordered minimal casualties. Humans were to be subdued, not exterminated. That order did not survive first contact. Human soldiers threw themselves between our weapons and their civilians. They formed living barriers, bodies against plasma, bone against energy. I watched one human lift a child and hurl them into cover, only to be cut down a heartbeat later. Another dragged a wounded stranger across open ground, screaming defiance until silence claimed them both. Our warriors hesitated. We were trained for combat, yes, but against armed opponents, against enemies who fought to win. Humans fought to protect. It was disorienting. Their willingness to die without expectation of success disrupted Dominion tactical algorithms. Engagement models began to fail. Then came the incident that would echo through history. An elite Dominion warrior, genetic caste Primus, enhanced beyond baseline parameters, was separated from his unit during urban combat. Human resistance fighters collapsed a structure atop him, trapping but not killing. When extraction forces arrived, the signal was gone. We assumed termination. Instead, surveillance revealed something unprecedented.
The warrior had been captured. He lay broken within the ruins of a human medical facility, his armor shattered, his internal systems failing. By Dominion law, such a warrior was to be euthanized if recovery was impossible. Capture by a lesser species was considered dishonor beyond repair. Yet the humans did not execute him. A single human approached him, a medic, identified by her markings. She was injured. Blood streamed from her scalp, one arm hanging useless at her side. Fear was evident in every movement. She should have fled. She did not. She examined him with shaking hands, speaking softly in her own language, as if he could understand. Our physiology was incompatible with theirs. Every medical doctrine stated that intervention was pointless. The warrior convulsed, his vitals spiked toward failure. And then, against all logic, she acted. She connected her own blood supply to his failing circulatory system, overriding her equipment's warnings. I remember leaning forward, unable to breathe, as the readouts fluctuated wildly. She was giving him her blood. I waited for the expected outcome: toxic rejection, systemic collapse, 2 lives ending in futility. Instead, his vitals stabilized. Then they surged. Power levels spiked beyond known Primus thresholds. Cellular regeneration accelerated. The warrior's eyes opened, burning with unfamiliar intensity. The medic collapsed moments later, unconscious but alive. Silence fell across the command sanctum. I felt it then, an irreversible shift, a fracture in the assumptions that governed her empire, a realization forming too vast, too dangerous to voice. Because in that ruined building, amid smoke and blood, humanity had done something no species had ever done to us. They chose mercy at the moment of greatest fear. And as recovery teams descended toward the site, unaware of what had just been born from that act, one certainty took root within me. First contact had ended, and something far more dangerous had begun. I watched him die from orbit. The Dominion warrior lay amid the shattered remains of a human medical structure, his massive form half buried in concrete and twisted alloy. His armor, forged to withstand planetary bombardment, had been torn open. Internal diagnostics streamed across my console in relentless red. Organ failure, neural degradation, irreversible cascade. By all Dominion doctrine, he was already dead. Our species does not linger at the edge of extinction. When recovery probabilities fall below threshold, we end suffering swiftly. Honor demands it. Efficiency requires it. I prepared myself to log his termination once the human captors realized the futility of keeping him alive. They did not. The human female returned. She should not have been standing. Her injuries were severe by human standards. Blood loss, cranial trauma, fractured limb. She moved unevenly, every step an act of defiance against her own failing body. Medical scans showed her heart rate elevated beyond safe limits, stress hormones flooding her system. Fear radiated from her, yet she approached the dying warrior anyway. I magnified the feed, my secondary vision narrowing as she knelt beside him. She spoke again, quiet, rhythmic sounds meant to soothe. Not commands, not threats, reassurance. Her hands trembled as she examined his wounds, her tools inadequate, her knowledge insufficient. She knew he was alien. She knew he was the enemy. She chose to help him regardless. When she accessed her own blood supply, I felt a tightening across my neural lattice. The incompatibility warnings screamed across my displays. Human blood was biochemically hostile, adaptive, aggressive, engineered by evolution to destroy foreign invaders. To introduce it directly into Dominion physiology should have been lethal. She hesitated only once. Then she made the connection. The moment her blood entered his system, every Dominion model predicted catastrophic failure. I watched, prepared to witness 2 lives end in silence. Instead, the warrior convulsed. His vitals spiked erratically, cellular structures destabilized, then reorganized. Genetic markers I had never seen before ignited across the scans, responding, adapting, integrating. The human blood did not attack his cells, it challenged them, and his body answered. Regeneration surged at impossible speed. Fractured bone fused, neural pathways rerouted, musculature thickened, reinforced beyond caste limitations. Energy output climbed past safety governors, past biological ceilings long thought absolute. I stared in disbelief as his heart stabilized, stronger than before. The human female collapsed moments later, her consciousness extinguished by exhaustion and blood loss. Automated human systems stabilized her, alarms shrieking into the ruined air. The warrior rose. He stood slowly at first, testing limbs that should not have functioned. Then he moved faster, too fast. He tore free the remnants of his armor, shards clattering to the floor like discarded shells. His eyes burned with unfamiliar intensity, not feral, not enraged, but focused. At that moment, Dominion retrieval forces breached the perimeter. They expected to recover a corpse. What they found was a singularity. Human resistance fighters scattered as the warrior stepped forward, placing himself between the incoming Dominion strike unit and the ruined settlement. Energy weapons fired. They struck him directly. He did not fall. The blasts dispersed across his altered physiology, absorbed, redirected. He advanced through the fire as if it were rain. With one strike, he shattered a combat drone. With another, he collapsed a gunship mid-ascent, leaping impossibly high to do so. I watched seasoned Dominion soldiers hesitate. They had never seen one of their own move like that. He fought alone, not with the cold precision of our doctrine, but with something else layered beneath it. Urgency, ferocity, protectiveness. When a human child emerged from cover, frozen in terror, the warrior shifted his stance instinctively, shielding the smaller body without conscious thought. That gesture struck me harder than any weapon. The engagement ended in minutes. Dominion forces withdrew, broadcasting confusion, fear thinly veiled beneath discipline. The warrior did not pursue. He turned back toward the settlement, scanning for threats until silence returned. Only then did he kneel. He lifted the unconscious human medic with hands that could have crushed starship hulls and held her as if she were fragile beyond measure. The council convened within the hour. They called it an anomaly, a statistical aberration, a one-time reaction between incompatible biologies. They ordered the data sealed, the warrior quarantined, the human incident classified. I said nothing aloud, but in my private logs, my language abandoned restraint. This was not anomaly. This was revelation. Humanity had evolved not merely to survive adversity, but to weaponize it. Their blood carried the memory of every plague, every radiation storm, every war they had endured. It did not merely heal, it adapted others to suffering. They did not hoard this trait. They did not guard it behind borders or doctrine. They gave it away, freely, blindly, even to an enemy. And as I watched the warrior carry the human who had saved him into the smoke-filled ruins, a chilling certainty took root within me. If human compassion could transform one of our greatest soldiers into something beyond our control, what would happen when humanity decided to share its resilience with the galaxy? The Council feared conquest. They should have feared contact. Because the moment human blood entered Dominion veins, the future of power had already changed, and nothing we did next would stop it. The laboratories fell silent long before the results were complete. Dominion research facilities are not quiet places by nature. They hum with restrained energy, voices layered over data streams, artificial minds debating probability curves faster than organic thought. But as the data from the transformed warrior propagated through secured channels, Sound itself seemed to retreat. We were staring at heresy. Human blood samples, microscopic quantities extracted with extreme caution, were introduced into isolated Dominion cellular matrices. According to every established law of biology, the reaction should have been violent: rejection, cellular collapse, death. Instead, the cells changed. I watched the simulations unfold in real time, my breathing slow and deliberate, as systems recalculated again and again, searching for errors that were not there. Human blood did not behave like a pathogen, nor like a nutrient. It acted as a catalyst, provoking Dominion cells into rapid adaptive response, forcing evolution not across generations, but within moments. Our scientists called it adaptive nanobiology, though the term was insufficient. There were no machines.
No artificial constructs. What humans carried had been shaped organically, brutally, over millennia of exposure to disease, radiation, chemical warfare, and environmental collapse. Their immune systems were not shields. They were weapons. Human leukocytes did not simply identify threats, they learned from them. They rewrote internal structures, leaving behind permanent improvements. Pain tolerance thresholds spiked, regenerative capacity increased, neural resilience hardened. Exposure did not weaken Dominion tissue, it enhanced it. One researcher whispered something I will never forget. As further tests confirmed the results, panic crept into the upper tiers of command. The implications were impossible to contain. Dominion warriors exposed even briefly to human biological material exhibited measurable improvements: faster reaction times, heightened endurance, resistance to damage that would have previously been fatal. And it was not limited to warriors. Engineers working alongside human refugees adapted more quickly to stress overload. Medics exposed to human pathogens developed broader immunities. Even civilian administrators showed increased cognitive resilience under pressure. The effect was subtle at first. Then it compounded. Volunteers emerged almost immediately. At first, they were unofficial, researchers requesting controlled exposure under the guise of academic curiosity. When their performance metrics improved, word spread. Entire warrior cohorts petitioned for sanctioned integration programs. Genetic caste Primus units, once rigidly isolated, demanded access. They did not ask politely. "Our enemies grow stronger," one commander stated before the council. That was the moment fear truly took hold. The council had always ruled through control of resources, of technology, of information. Human resilience obeyed none of those structures. It could not be monopolized. It could not be confined to a fleet or a weapon platform. It spread through contact, through cooperation, through proximity. Attempts were made to regulate interaction, quarantines established, but Dominion space was already contaminated, not with disease, but with possibility. Too many had seen the data. Too many had felt the change within themselves. I reviewed internal communications intercepted from lower castes. The language disturbed me more than open rebellion ever could. They spoke of humans with reverence. The council convened emergency sessions daily now. Projections were revised. Conquest timelines quietly erased. Control models collapsed under the weight of an unquantifiable variable. Human adaptability was not static. It increased with exposure to adversity. And adversity followed us wherever we went. Humanity was not conquering the Dominion with fleets or superweapons. They were not dismantling our defenses or seizing our worlds. They were changing us, reshaping what it meant to be strong. In one sealed chamber, I observed the transformed warrior undergoing evaluation. His metrics exceeded maximum projections by margins that should not exist, yet when questioned, he spoke not of power or superiority. He asked about the human medic, her condition, her survival. That, more than any data point, shattered the last illusion I held. Because science I could debate, biology I could quantify, but this compulsion to protect, to bond, to value weakness alongside strength was something no model could explain. As the council scrambled to regain authority, issuing directives no one fully obeyed, a realization settled into my core with chilling clarity. The Dominion had always believed resilience was something to be engineered, controlled, rationed. Humans had proven otherwise. Resilience was contagious, and we had already been exposed. The attack came from the dark between stars. The Karat Ascendancy had been watching us. Of this there is now no doubt. They saw the fractures forming within the Dominion, fleets repositioned towards Sol, research assets diverted, command structures strained by debate and denial. Where we hesitated, they acted.
Their first strike erased 3 border systems in a single cycle. Entire orbital habitats were burned before evacuation alarms finished sounding. Defense grids, calibrated for known threats, collapsed under unfamiliar weapon harmonics. The Ascendancy did not probe or threaten. They came to end us, swiftly and efficiently, as predators do when weakness reveals itself. The Council declared an emergency mobilization. It was not enough. Our fleets were scattered. Our response lagged behind the speed of annihilation. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, extinction probabilities crossed unacceptable thresholds. I watched population curves plummet in real time, each descending line representing billions of lives reduced to data. Panic rippled through command channels. And then, unexpectedly, a new signal appeared. Human transponders. At first, we assumed desperation, a misguided attempt at alliance, perhaps. Their vessels were unsuited for deep space fleet engagements. Their weapons were inferior, their numbers insignificant compared to the Ascendancy armadas advancing toward our core worlds. Yet they did not request permission. They did not wait for orders. Human ships emerged from slipspace directly into the projected kill zones between Dominion evacuation corridors and Ascendancy forward elements. Their hulls were scarred, mismatched, layers of different alloys welded together, systems rerouted beyond standard tolerances. Many bore the marks of recent combat. Some barely maintained structural integrity. They took positions meant for our fleets. I listened as human commanders broadcast on open channels, not to us, but to one another. Their voices were strained, raw with exhaustion, yet steady. Civilians behind us. The Ascendancy did not hesitate. They opened fire.
Human ships died in the first exchange, exploded, imploded, vanished in brilliant silence, and still more surged forward, filling the gaps without pause. They maneuvered unpredictably, breaking every engagement doctrine we recognized. Where Dominion strategy emphasized survival and withdrawal, humans emphasized delay. Time. They thought not to win, but to buy seconds. Those seconds became minutes. Minutes became hours. I saw human crews reroute life support to weapons, starving themselves of air to keep firing. I saw engineers manually override reactors moments before overload, remaining behind to ensure their ships detonated at optimal proximity to enemy formations. Escape pods launched empty, decoys to draw fire away from evacuation convoys. They fought like extinction was personal, because for them, it always had been. As Dominion fleets scrambled to regroup, human vessels formed a living barricade across space itself. They transmitted real-time combat data to us without encryption, without demand for reciprocity. When their communications arrays failed, they hard-linked guidance systems directly to Dominion networks, granting us control over what little they had left. "Use it," one human captain said simply, moments before his ship was torn apart. I felt something tighten within me, an emotion too complex for immediate classification. Shame, perhaps, or awe. Against all projections, the line held. The Ascendancy advance slowed, then stalled, forced to redeploy resources to break a resistance that should not have existed. That delay, bought entirely with human lives, gave Dominion fleets the time they needed to reorganize, reinforce, and counterattack. When our armadas finally arrived, they found humans still fighting, still dying, still refusing to yield. Together, we broke the Ascendancy's spearhead. Their retreat was sudden, violent, incomplete. Victory came at a cost that defied calculation, but it came. Afterward, the battlefield drifted with wreckage, Dominion and human ships intertwined, indistinguishable in death. Emergency signals echoed in every frequency, many unanswered. I ordered search and rescue priorities recalculated. Human life pods were flagged first. That decision was not approved by the Council. No one challenged it. In the aftermath, casualty reports were compiled. Billions of Dominion lives preserved, evacuation corridors maintained, core systems untouched. The analysts traced survivability curves back through the battle and reached a conclusion so stark it silenced the chamber. Without human intervention, the Dominion would have fallen. The Council convened an emergency session once more. Their voices were subdued now, stripped of certainty. They acted without authorization, one counselor said weakly. They disobeyed no treaty, another replied.
I said nothing. I was watching the human survivors. Exhausted crews, bloodied and burned, working without pause to pull Dominion citizens from wreckage. They did not segregate,
did not prioritize their own. To them, survival was collective or meaningless. One human officer, when thanked by a Dominion relief commander, only shook her head. "Didn't do it for you," she said. That was when the truth settled fully into me. We had believed humans dangerous because they were violent. We were wrong. They were dangerous because they remembered extinction, not as theory, but as lived inheritance. And when faced with it again, they did not ask who deserved saving. They simply stood in the way. As recovery operations continued and the Council struggled to reshape a narrative that no longer served them, I recorded a final note for that cycle, my claws unsteady as I sealed it. The Dominion planned to enslave humanity. Instead, when annihilation came, humanity chose to save us. And I fear, truly fear, that the galaxy will never forgive us for misunderstanding what that means. Fear did not arrive in the council chamber all at once. It seeped in slowly, like vacuum through a fractured hull, silent, invisible, undeniable. The Hall of Concord had always been a place of certainty. Decisions made there shaped centuries. Species rose or fell at the measured cadence of council votes. I had stood in that chamber through wars, annexations, and extinctions, never once sensing doubt in the air. Now it was thick enough to taste. The victory over the Karat ascendancy should have restored confidence. Our fleets had regrouped, our borders held. Official communiques spoke of resilience and unity. But beneath the polished language, the Council's projections told a different story, one they could no longer ignore. Human involvement was the variable that broke every model. They had not turned the tide through superior firepower. They had not outmaneuvered the ascendancy with advanced technology. They had simply refused to collapse. Where Dominion forces calculated acceptable losses, humans ignored the concept entirely. They fought as if defeat was not an outcome, only delay. That terrified the Council, because endurance cannot be intimidated. I presented my analysis during the third emergency session, my voice echoing too loudly in the chamber's vastness. I spoke of human adaptation curves, of cultural conditioning towards sacrifice, of how exposure to humanity altered Dominion behavior itself. I chose my words carefully, knowing the cost of candor. They inspire loyalty without hierarchy, I said. They do not rule through fear. They do not demand obedience. A murmur rippled across the assembled counselors. One struck the floor with a ceremonial's calf. Loyalty is irrelevant. Another disagreed, their tone sharp with something close to panic. Manageable species do not reshape our warrior castes. The chamber erupted into fractured debate. Some counselors still clung to the old doctrine. Humans, they insisted, were emotionally driven, unsustainable, bound to self-destruct eventually. Time would erode them as it had eroded all others. But time had already tested humanity, again and again. I activated the hololithic display without request, an act of quiet defiance. The projection filled with images from the recent battle. Human ships burning to keep evacuation corridors open. Medics treating Dominion civilians before their own wounded. Soldiers dying, unnamed, unrecorded, satisfied only that others had lived. This is not recklessness, I said softly. It is a strategy evolved under constant threat. Silence followed. For the first time, the counselors looked not at the data, but at one another. The realization passed between them unspoken. Humanity could not be controlled through intimidation, nor pacified through comfort. They did not seek dominance. They did not require permission. They acted according to internal imperatives shaped by millennia of survival against overwhelming odds. One counselor voiced the fear we all shared. No one answered. Because we all knew the truth. Perhaps with sufficient force, with enough time and blood, the Dominion could crush humanity. But victory would be Pyrrhic beyond comprehension. And worse, every battle would make humans stronger, more adaptable, more united. You cannot break what expects to be broken. The question shifted subtly then, sliding like a blade between ribs. It was no longer, can we defeat them? It was, should we try? Another projection appeared, unprompted this time. Psychological impact assessments from across Dominion space. Reports of citizens volunteering to work alongside humans. Warrior units requesting joint deployments. Entire populations expressing admiration. Not fear. Admiration. The Council had ruled for generations by presenting itself as inevitable. Humans challenged that not with rebellion, but with example. They demonstrated a different way to face the universe, where strength was measured not by dominance, but what one was willing to endure for others. That idea was contagious, and it terrified those who relied on control. A senior counselor finally spoke, their voice stripped of authority, bare and uncertain. I thought of the human medic, bleeding and afraid, choosing mercy without hesitation. I thought of human captains burning in their ships so Dominion children could escape. I thought of the transformed warrior, kneeling to protect instead of conquer. I answered honestly. Alive, I said. The chamber fell into stunned quiet. In that silence, I felt the old order tremble, not from external attack, but from internal reckoning. The Council understood at last what made humanity dangerous. Not their violence, not their technology. Their endurance, their adaptability, their willingness to sacrifice without promise of reward. Empires could withstand fleets and weapons. They could not withstand a species that made others question the morality of ruling at all. As the session adjourned in uneasy disarray, no resolutions passed, no commands issued, I recorded one final observation for the archives.
The Dominion had always feared rebellion. What now gripped the Council was far worse. They feared becoming irrelevant. And beyond that fear, unspoken but undeniable, lay an even more dangerous question. If humanity is what survival looks like, what does that make us? The first shots were fired by our own. That is the truth the archives tried to bury. Extremist factions within the Dominion, those who still believed control could be reclaimed through terror, acted without Council sanction. They called it a containment purge. Human integration hubs were targeted, joint research stations, refugee corridors where Dominion civilians and humans worked side by side. The strikes were meant to provoke fear. They succeeded, but not in the way the extremists intended. I was monitoring the situation when the first reports arrived. Human settlements burning under Dominion plasma, evacuation ships destroyed mid-ascent, medics killed while tending to the wounded. Casualty counts rose rapidly, skewed heavily toward non-combatants. I waited for the expected response. Uncoordinated retaliation, rage without direction, the kind of emotional outburst the Council had long predicted would define humanity in crisis. Instead, I watched something far more frightening unfold. Human command channels went dark, not silent, focused. Within hours, their fleets reorganized with surgical precision. Units withdrew from public space, vanishing into vectors only they could navigate. Communication between human commanders was minimal, encrypted, deliberate. This was not a species lashing out. This was a species choosing its targets. They did not strike Dominion population centers. They did not disrupt civilian infrastructure. Instead, they traced every purge order to its source, every transmission, every funding stream, every command node. Then they moved. Human strike teams emerged inside fortified Dominion facilities without warning. Security systems failed in cascading patterns, neutralized through techniques born of centuries of asymmetric warfare. Power grids collapsed selectively. Weapons depots were sabotaged without detonations. Commanders were extracted from bunkers thought impenetrable. I watched feeds I was never meant to see. Extremist leaders confronted by humans who did not shout, did not threaten. They simply presented evidence, irrefutable proof of crimes committed, before rendering judgment. Some were detained, others resisted. Those did not survive. The war, if it can be called that, lasted 4 days. 4 days from the first human counterstrike to the final extremist surrender. Dominion fleets, when they finally mobilized, found the conflict already resolved. The purge networks dismantled, their architects removed with near-total precision. Human casualties were heavy, but limited to combatants. They had gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid collateral damage, even at cost to themselves. That restraint shook me more than their efficiency. When the Council reconvened, chaos reigned. Accusations flew, denials collapsed under the weight of evidence the humans provided freely, publicly, without embellishment. One counselor demanded retribution. A human envoy replied, their voice steady, exhausted. We stopped a massacre, they said. There was no triumph in them, no hunger for dominance, only grief and resolve. They could have burned worlds. They did not. They could have seized power. They refused. They dismantled the threat and stepped back. Mercy, again. Always mercy. In private, I reviewed post-conflict analyses. Human operational doctrine during the Purge emphasized something Dominion strategists found incomprehensible: minimum necessary force. Objectives were not territory or submission, but cessation of harm. The war humanity never wanted became the war that redefined us. Because in ending it, humans proved something beyond doubt. They were capable of absolute destruction. They simply chose not to use it. As the last extremist stronghold fell and silence returned to joint space, I recorded a final note for this section of the archives. We had feared that humanity would one day turn its fury upon the Dominion. We were wrong. The day they truly frighten the galaxy will not be when they rage. It will be when they decide, calmly, precisely, that mercy has limits. And as I watched human fleets withdraw, leaving behind order instead of ruin, I understood the most dangerous truth of all. This war ended because humans wanted it to. The next one might not. History does not mark its turning points with noise. There was no declaration of unity, no grand treaty signed beneath converging banners, no ceremony to announce the end of an age. The Dominion did not fall, and humanity did not rise to replace it. Instead, we changed. Quietly. Irreversibly. In the cycles following the Purge, joint worlds began to appear along our borders, settlements where humans and Dominion citizens lived not as overseer and subject, but as partners bound by necessity and trust. At first, the Council resisted even naming them. They existed in legal ambiguity, tolerated rather than sanctioned. Then, their productivity surpassed every projection. Human engineers rebuilt Dominion infrastructure with designs shaped by redundancy and failure tolerance rather than optimization alone. Systems no longer collapsed when stressed, they bent. Human medics rewrote emergency response doctrine, prioritizing survival under worst-case scenarios instead of ideal conditions. And our people adapted. Human bloodlines integrated gradually, not through conquest or coercion, but through choice. Medical exchange programs began as experiments, then became policy. The results were undeniable. Dominion physiology strengthened, our warriors endured longer, recovered faster, resisted psychological collapse under sustained trauma. But the greatest change was not physical. It was cultural.
Dominion societies had long been structured around stability. Risk was minimized. Loss was hidden. Failure was shameful. Humans brought something alien into our collective consciousness: acceptance. Not acceptance of defeat, but acceptance of pain. They did not romanticize suffering, but they did not fear it either. They taught us that survival was not the absence of damage, but the ability to continue despite it. That lesson reshaped our institutions more profoundly than any genetic integration ever could. Warrior castes began training alongside human units, not to learn their tactics, but their mindset. Humans fought knowing they might not return. Dominion warriors began to understand that possibility, not as tragedy, but as responsibility. And still, humans refused what the Council expected. They declined titles, refused noble designations. When offered permanent council seats, they laughed, a sound rare and unsettling in the Hall of Concord. "We don't rule well," one human representative said simply. "We survive." They accepted no crowns, no tribute, no dominion of their own. They asked for one thing only: that we remember. I attended a memorial on a joint world near the Soul Frontier. There were no statues of heroes, no towering monuments of conquest, only names, thousands of them, etched into stone, metal, and light. Human names, Dominion names, interwoven, indistinguishable. "This is the cost," a human elder said quietly as we stood among them. "Not to shame you. Remind us of the lives spent holding lines we never should have let them face alone, of the blood freely given, sometimes literally, without expectation of reward, of the moments when humanity stood between us and extinction while we debated protocol." I felt something then that no council session had ever stirred within me: gratitude, and something heavier: responsibility. Our warriors grew stronger, yes, our cities more resilient. Our reach across the stars expanded once more, not as conquerors, but as collaborators. The Dominion endured, but it was no longer what it had been. Nor should it have been. In private correspondence, some counselors whispered of dependency,
of reliance on human resilience as a weakness. They feared that without humanity we would falter. Perhaps they were right. But dependence born of shared survival is not subjugation. It is alliance. I watched the transformed warrior, once an anomaly, now a symbol, train alongside human recruits. He bore scars no regenerative process had erased, by choice. Humanity never asked us to become them. They only showed us what we could become if we stopped pretending we were untouchable. As the joint civilizations grew and the galaxy adjusted uneasily to this new equilibrium, I recorded my final observations on the matter. The Dominion survived because humans shared their resilience. But we became something else entirely because they shared their memory of pain.
And as I looked out across worlds that should never have existed, thriving precisely because they were built to endure collapse, I understood that our future no longer belonged to those who feared breaking. It belonged to those who knew how to stand again. And that legacy was human. I record this not as prophecy, not as warning, only as truth, etched in the cold precision of observation. The galaxy had long believed strength measured in fleets, in shields, in weapons capable of tearing planets apart. Dominion doctrine codified it, ascendancy scholars revered it, every empire calculated it. Power is a currency, destruction is leverage, logic is supreme. Humans defy all of it. Yet containment never lasted. The humans moved through death as if it were a storm, not a verdict. Every lost city, every scorched battlefield, every plague, famine, or fire was not a lesson in despair. It was a crucible. They emerged not unscathed, but unbroken, each tragedy forging resilience into their very marrow. They are not the strongest. They are stronger than the galaxy expects, because their strength is choice. Choice defines them, compassion when annihilation surrounds them, hope when all logic demands surrender, sacrifice when every instinct screams for preservation. And each time their endurance spreads, not by coercion, not by dominance, but through the example they set, through the loyalty they inspire, through the lives they save simply by refusing to yield. The Dominion realized this too late. We had believed that fleets, weapons, and genetics defined the balance of power. Humanity proved it wrong. By standing, by acting, by surviving, they reshaped the equation entirely. Billions owed their continued existence to humans who were never required to intervene. Entire civilizations adapted because humans taught them how. Even warriors genetically engineered to dominate were remade, strengthened, and humanized by their influence. Other species across the galaxy have begun to notice. Intelligence reports catalog the pattern. Planets once written off, saved by human intervention. Military forces once feared, incapacitated by their presence. Alliances forming not by coercion, but because humans endure beside them, not above them. Because the truth is unmistakable. Humanity does not conquer through fear, through annihilation, or through domination. The galaxy does not fear humans for the worlds they seize. It fears them for what they teach. That survival is not an accident, that endurance is a choice, that hope can exist even when all is lost. When everything collapses, when the proudest fleets fall silent, when despair claims the hearts of every other species, the humans remain. And the galaxy, for the first time in its vast, ancient history, understands that endurance is the most terrifying weapon of all. The Council may write reports, the analysts may calculate probabilities, the historians may record dates and names. I record this instead, not as warning, not as threat, as testimony. The galaxy does not fear humanity because they dominate. It fears humanity because they endure. Because, in the final measure, they will never break. And when every other species falters, every empire crumbles, and every plan fails, humanity will still stand. And that standing alone is enough to reshape everything.